Um, and now let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. So I'm just going to read the name that I see in my participant list, and if you would introduce yourself, where it is that you work, and if you want to share right now what breakout session you'd prefer to be in, that would be excellent. And if you'd like to also share your gender pronouns with the group, it'd be helpful so that we have that more easy to identify, especially useful when we're on these kind of calls that have a lot of mixed medium and how people are engaging. So I am Beth Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director here at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be in the workshop design breakout session today. And next we're going to go to Sasha.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Sasha Peterson. I'm the Director of Adaptation International, and we're supporting GLISA and ASAP on this project and helping out with the workshop and design and execution. So, Beth, you tell me where you would like me to go for these breakouts.
Probably to the workshop session with me.
Sounds good.
Great. Amanda Stevens.
Amanda Stevens. I'm a project manager at NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I work mostly on climate change impacts and adaptation. And I will be in the needs assessment survey breakout.
Great. Glenn Milner.
Hi, I'm a climate change specialist with Savanta, which is based out of Toronto, Ontario. And I do quite a bit of work with climate resilience for local communities across the Great Lakes Basin. I think I will be in the needs assessment survey breakout group. And then I will, I look forward to kind of joining. This is my first time as part of this group. So looking forward to kind of hearing what the status is and how it's going and kind of bringing some Canadian perspective. And I use pronouns he and him. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. It's also nice to see you or hear you.
You too.
Beth Tomlinson.
Hey everyone, Beth Tomlinson. I prefer she, her. I'm with TKDA in Minnesota. I am a senior mechanical engineer and I'm involved with ASHRAE, specifically in global climate change and climatic information. And if I could, I prefer the breakout session 1.
Great. Brian Smoliak.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Smoliak. I prefer he, him. And I am also new to the group today. I am a climate scientist by training and a climate entrepreneur by choice these days, by necessity. And I am a partner at 2 Degrees Adapt, which is a climate adaptation technology advisory firm in the Twin Cities, also in Minnesota. And I would prefer to be in the workshop design breakout group.
Great. I have a 630 phone number.
I think that might be me, Beth. This is Laura Briley with GLISA.
Oh, great. Hi, Laura.
But my name is, I put my name in as a participant, but I called in separately, so maybe I,
yeah,
maybe I did that all wrong.
No, you did it right. It's one of the trickinesses, and sometimes I learn people's numbers, so I don't repeat them. But in this case, I didn't know it yet, so.
Would you like me to introduce myself now, or were you saving till I do my presentation in a minute?
Why don't you just do the intro now, and we'll come back to you for the presentation.
Okay, so sorry again, my name is Laura Briley. I prefer she, her pronouns, and I'm with GLISA. I'm a climatologist. I wasn't on the first call because I believe it happened when I was still on maternity leave, so I feel like I'm still getting caught up and excited to learn more about this work. And Beth, I'll leave it up to you in terms of the working group. I was kind of thinking workshop, but if you feel that I'd be better off with the needs assessment, that's fine too.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about it as we get closer. I would think workshop at this point, but Rachel and Kyle may want to chime in because they've been doing more design on the needs assessment side, so they might have some thoughts of GLISA input in that section.
Okay, definitely. I'm happy to help with whatever. Both
Perfect.
is an option too. So.
Perfect. Erica Heller.
Hi, This is Erica Heller. I use pronouns she, her. I'm a senior planning manager with Brendel Group, and we are a private sector consultancy that works in this space. We work with communities on sustainability, climate change, energy, and water resiliency. So very much interested in learning about this, as this is also my first one of these calls. And I think probably the needs assessment breakout would be best for me.
Great, thanks Erica, and thanks for joining us. Jeffrey Meek.
Hi everyone, this is Jeff Meek. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and I focus primarily on climate adaptation and climate resilience here in the agency. And as far as the breakout sessions, I am fine to go to either one. I don't know if, Beth, if when we get closer, if there's a group that needs more people, I can float to that one. Otherwise, I would lean a little bit towards the workshop.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Then I have a 773 number.
Yes, that's Ann Ellingson.
Oh, hi, Ann.
Yes, hi. I am Ann Ellingson. I am recovering from bronchitis, so anyway, and I use she and her, and I am an ASAP volunteer, and will be starting the Masters in Climate Change program at University of Waterloo in the fall.
Awesome.
In Ontario, Canada. Yeah.
Great. Do you have a preference of what breakout group to be in?
Workshop planning.
Great. So I believe that Kyle is on the call, but I don't see them. So Kyle, if you're on and can introduce yourself, that would be terrific.
I am. I'm here somewhere. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're another Rachel Jacobson. That's fine. Oh. All the Rachels. Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. That's totally fine. I mean, this is the economy of Zoom accounts. So
I'm Kyle Sullivan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a program assistant at ASAP. So you've already been receiving emails from me. I'm excited to join today's meeting. I wasn't able to be here in December, so I'll mostly be in the background taking notes and then supporting the needs assessment survey that section.
Excellent. Thank you. And then the real Rachel Jacobson, are you here too?
Please stand up.
Here I am. I'm the same height, standing and sitting, so it won't help. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Jacobson. I'm the Senior Program Manager at ASAP, and I'm just stepping into this project in the past couple of weeks, excited to learn more and to see everything coming to fruition, and I'll be leading the assessment breakout group.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for taking the time to do these intros for a project like this. I think it's especially helpful for folks to kind of hear where each other are. And also for me, I would say the set of introductions was a really helpful tally of kind of who's new in kind of getting the up to speed maybe on this project. And as you heard, there are a lot of folks who are new, including a lot of the project team. So I encourage you, as you have questions about this project, about the status, about the timeline, whatever it is, chime in, ask questions. We're going to move next in our agenda to an overview of the GLISA products that Laura Briley is going to lead. And the thinking being that for those who are in this advisory group, it's really important for you to understand what the GLISA products are and why we feel like it's so valuable to be bringing those more fully into the private sector and really engaging and creating this facilitated engagement between public climate resources and private sector service providers. So Laura's going to be talking about those products, and then we're going to have a recap of kind of where we are, the project goals. There's slides on the project goals again in the slide deck that went out. We're going to talk about the timeline, and then we're going to talk about ways to be engaged, including the breakouts that will follow that project overview. So I had hesitated about keeping those overview slides in the deck, but I'm really glad that I did now, because I think that it can be a helpful place for us to, one, point to them as a resource and maybe spend a bit of time if people want to do some kind of recapping of what it is we're all doing here together. So what, Laura, I have a big GLISA slide, which hopefully is showing up in my shared screen now. But I'm happy to hand it over to you to take us away on a tour of those GLISA resources. And if you need control of the PowerPoint to share slides, I think that Rachel can provide you with that.
Is it an option to share my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm ready whenever you are. I tried taking it, but it says I can't take it.
Let's see.
Hey. Oh, here you are, Laura.
I think you just have to stop sharing, whoever's hosting and sharing, then the other people can share.
Okay. Too much sharing. Zoom is like, not too much sharing, one at a time.
Yeah, take turns. Here's the talking stick.
I think this will work. Let's see.
Great.
Okay, can you see it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, hi. Beth asked me to just give a brief overview of GLISA resources. These are kind of like a summary of our most popular, most accessible resources. So I'm going to, I wasn't sure of everyone's background on our GLISA team, our program. So we're one of the NOAA RISA teams serving the Great Lakes region, which is just defined simply as any state that touches a Great Lake from New York going west to Minnesota plus Southern Ontario. And we are a collaboration between University of Michigan and Michigan State, and we have just added a co-PI from University of Wisconsin-Madison, funded through the NOAA program. And we really sit between this area of research, being at a university, we have access to all the latest, greatest research on climate change in our region, but we sit between the research and then the service, like being a service provider. So we work directly with stakeholders and organizations that they're associated with, which we call a boundary organization, to bring that research to the user community. We primarily just are using existing climate information and data and interpreting that for stakeholders that we work with. And one of the main aspects of our work is localizing that climate information to whatever spatial scale the stakeholder is working on, whether that's a city versus a county or a larger area. And we ask three primary questions of the data and information to deliver to the stakeholder, and that is what has happened, or what has happened historically in someone's location in terms of climate and climate change and climate variability, what will happen in the future, and then ultimately most are interested in what are the impacts going to be from those changes. That's kind of like the framework that we use when we're working with a stakeholder or answering those three main questions. Just a little bit more on GLISA, and the map here is just a map of some of our partnerships. It's quite outdated now by several years. So we really need to update this, but it kind of gives you an idea of our region and different locations and that we've been serving. But more importantly, GLISA is providing customized climate information to within each of our partnerships. We've also contributed to the U.S. National Climate Assessment. We act as a convener of groups. We've convened the Great Lakes Adaptation Forum several times now, and we're also trying to connect peers within the network. So we study how networks of people are interacting with each other and trying to figure out, who can we maybe connect to leverage knowledge and experience and resources within these partnerships. So the main topic for today is just an overview of our resources. And I kind of divide these up into two different broad categories. So people might come to us for regional data. but they might also come to us for regional knowledge and experience and expertise. So Beth had kind of outlined 4 main resources that she wanted me to talk about today, and so I've numbered them here, and I'll present them in that order. The first is one of our data resources, or the Great Lakes Adaptation Data Suite, which we call GLAD. And the second is a set of more packaged data products, which are historical climatologies. I'll give examples of all of these in the coming slides. The third is to talk a little bit more about a Great Lakes Ensemble, which is really my area of expertise. And the last one is we have a broad experience working with a vast array of stakeholders. And so we bring a lot of that project experience. We have that available, and we can bring that to future projects as well. So the project that Beth wanted me to touch on is our stormwater vulnerability assessment. So you'll hear about all of these things. So just briefly about our Great Lakes Adaptation Data Suite. This is really a nice way that we've brought together lots of different data sets, both climate related and also related to the lakes themselves, the physical Great Lakes, so like lake temperature, ice cover, things of that nature. Bringing all those data sets together in one place, making them accessible, and standardizing them so it's easier to combine data sets together in like a GIS type format, or it's easier to do analysis with them. Right now, this is containing mostly historical observations, but in the next year or so, we'll be adding future projections to this data set. That's kind of in the works right now. The map is showing you some of the point-based observational data sets that we have available from a variety of different sources. And then the black rectangle across the domain is kind of showing you the focus area for a reanalysis data set that we have. The climate projections, though, that we have cover all of the region that you're seeing, extending US and into Canada. The second product are touching on GLISA's climatologies, and we have 2 versions of this. Basically, a climatology is just a description of the historical climate. Usually we rely on about 30 or more years of data to call it a climatology. And the balloons that you're seeing on the map are locations where we have quality controlled, GLISA has a very strict quality control standard. So we have quality controlled location-based climate summaries available. And these really work well if we're working in a city, say, that has one of these high quality stations, or some cities have multiple stations, and we can really give the practitioner the most local, detailed summary of their historical climate. And those summaries help us to answer that question in our framework of what has happened. So we have the stations available, but we also have more regionalized, before I talk about that, this is just an example of what we have available on our website, a few figures that I pulled from one of the station climatologies at Chicago Midway. So we have both time series, we have some tables and other graphics as well. This is just to kind of show you a sample of the type of format of data that we have. We also have similar summaries available at the multi-county scale. So these are essentially just an aggregate of those stations, but sometimes you're working with a partner who doesn't have a high quality station nearby, so you can't just rely on a location-based analysis, but you can do more of a regional summary here. So these are standard US Climate Division boundaries. We are just now launching a group to develop an equivalent type of boundary for Canada and Ontario specifically. So I'm excited that we'll be working to expand this map to include the rest of what we consider our Great Lakes region. These don't include necessarily as much detail as the stations, just because you can't perform the same kind of analysis at the larger scale that you can at the smaller scale. We can't talk as much about extreme events at this scale with specific data, because extremes happen very locally, but this is another resource that we offer when you might not have that local station nearby to draw from. I want to spend a little bit more time on the Ensemble, and based on Beth's introduction, it sounded like that might be what a lot of people had questions on from the last time. So I'm excited to hear, questions, comments, feedback. This is very much a work in progress. But just to introduce the Ensemble, the goal of our Ensemble project is to ultimately provide the highest quality climate information for our region in a way that's usable to a wide variety of stakeholders, ranging from your local decision maker, your local planner, to other researchers as well. The three main tasks that we have for this project are developing an evaluation framework for evaluating climate models, which we have that framework set now, and we've started doing evaluations. We're providing a regional perspective on the quality of information that's coming from the models. So this is really touching on, not all models aren't created equally, and some models are really poor, offer poor information for our region. So trying to point people towards the better options when it comes to model selection. And then ultimately developing with practitioners products that they can use, because a lot of times, even though somebody might say they're interested in getting access to downscaled data, downscaled data may not actually be something that they're able to analyze themselves, and they might need help doing that. So what can we develop that can serve a wide variety of people and meet lots of needs across the region, some of those synthesis type products. And I have some examples to show of what we've been working on to date. So the first is a climate models buyer's guide. This is really getting to that evaluation piece. So we have a list of recommendations of what a climate model should be able to simulate, what it should have, some basic characteristics of a model for somebody to think that it might offer valuable information for our region. So we offer that type of a guide. It does require a certain level of technical knowledge, I would say. So it's really meant for somebody who is digging into the models and familiar with working with model data and trying to decide, which models might suit their work the best. This isn't going to be useful for all stakeholders, but it's serving one of our more technical audiences. This kind of goes along with the buyer's guide. So this is actually what we're calling a model report card, or it's essentially reporting on the different components and metrics that we say you should be looking for in a climate model. So it's showing you both details of the model that matter and that might help somebody decide if it's good for their particular use, but then it's also summarizing the performance of the model and how well did it simulate, say air temperatures or precipitation over the region, or how well does it simulate the Great Lakes themselves, which is a major factor in what we use to decide if a model is sufficient for our region. A third is another more model-specific product. We actually evaluated the CMIP-5 models for how they simulate the Great Lakes. We're kind of basing a lot of our decision on whether we want to recommend a model or not based on how well it simulates the Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes are such an important climate feature in our region, and they drive future climate changes. So we knew going into this that most of the models don't simulate the Great Lakes, so we wanted to make it clear which ones might offer more promising information than others. So we've kind of divided the CMIP-5 GCMs into models that simulate the lakes in some way, whether that's using a specific lake model, or perhaps they treat the Great Lakes like oceans, which is not necessarily a bad thing, versus models that simulate the lakes very crudely, whether that means they're really coarse resolution, they don't have all of the lakes, perhaps maybe Lake Superior is represented with one grid box. Some of those things are red flags in my mind in terms of choosing a model. And then lastly, the models that just simply don't include lakes at all. And then we have two, what I'm calling like user guides, which are geared really more towards an audience that would be more like a decision maker, city planner, someone who really doesn't know the details of climate models, details of downscaling. And the first is a scenario guide. We have really worked to develop a process that seems to work well for scenario planning. And we've brought that to several different groups now, and each iteration improves upon the next. And we've taken our lessons learned and developed a guide that explains what scenarios are. There's actually a couple different types of scenarios used in adaptation planning. And then we provide a tutorial for how to go through GLISA's scenario planning process. This has not been published yet, but it's getting very close. So depending on people's interests, we could potentially share some drafts of these things. And the second is a guide to downscale data for our region. It's geared to be, a couple-page document that is going to help aid people in choosing and using downscale data. It kind of lays out some of the just the basics about climate models and the basics of downscaling, and goes into what matters for the Great Lakes region, and tries to just get people to have a little bit more knowledge about how to go about using downscale data, and ultimately pointing people to some recommended sources. The last resource is related to that project experience that I mentioned, and Beth had said she was interested in knowing a little bit more about the vulnerability assessment work that we have done. So I was not involved in this project, but I reached out to one of our other climatologists who was, and she indicated, she sent me some information. So if there's specific questions, I'm happy to try to answer them, but I might also need to go back to the project person who helped with most of this work. But essentially, we started with a handful of cities and expanded the work to 12 cities, testing a vulnerability assessment template. And GLISA's role with this template was to populate it with local climate trends and projections, and then Headwaters Economics populated the template with the socioeconomic information, and these were specific to each of the 12 cities. And then the cities had to add in information that was local. There's a list of examples here. They were encouraged to add information about, land cover, vegetation, etc. And all of these pieces of information fed into that vulnerability template, and ultimately some training was provided to complete these assessments, and the focus was on the city stormwater system. And then the participants were prompted with exercises that helped them to assess sensitivity of the systems. And then lastly, there was the option, or there was communication of recommended steps for the teams to take after the training. This is really a high-level overview, but the interesting thing was this is kind of a springboard to some new work that GLISA has. GLISA just received a little over $2 million in funding to advance this work with 60 Gulf Coast cities. So we're really excited to keep propelling this forward and try to make this more accessible to more cities. And if you have questions about any of these things, I am happy to try to answer them. And just my last slide is, again, a review of the resources. So I don't know, Beth, if there is time for questions about any of these specific things, but I'm happy to take them if there are.
Yeah, we definitely have time for questions about these. And I really appreciate that overview. I also really think the Ensemble project is cool. So yeah, let's open it up for questions from the group about any of these products, or maybe accessing the products, so whatever may be floating around in your minds.
Hey, Laura, this is Sasha Peterson. With the Ensemble products, can you go back maybe to the slides, the pluses and minuses? Can you explain that a little bit? Is that just like thumbs up, thumbs down on those components? And then my second part of the question is, do users have to just pick a model that they, based on these report cards and run with it, or are there other ways that GLISA is making those data available in kind of an ensemble sort of setting?
Absolutely. So I think you're referring to the model report card, the pluses and minuses here.
Yes,
Is that correct?
definitely. Yep.
Okay, so this is all in helping us to improve communication. So the pluses and minuses are just highlighting strengths and weaknesses of the model in the areas of how well they simulated the different variables like the lake temperature, lake ice, runoff, net basin supply, things like that. So we kind of list strengths and weaknesses. These are all very much draft versions. So any input into whether something is confusing or whatnot, we actually are working with a group of stakeholders. We have an advisory committee with stakeholders. Beth is on that. So we've taken a lot of input. This might actually be a earlier version. I'm not recalling. I was on maternity leave for 5 months, so I'm just now getting back and picking everything back up and trying to figure out the status of everything. But we are working with a team of stakeholders to help us refine some of these products. And then to your second question, are stakeholders expected to just take this and then be able to work with the data themselves? The answer is no. The answer is these are really supporting documentation for a stakeholder to have some confidence in whatever data and information we might work with them to produce. So these are helping us say, why we chose a particular model to use for, a given project. And they're available for people if somebody does have the capacity to work with the data themselves, but this is not the end of the GLISA role in working with our partners.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Beth Tomlinson. I have a question about the information that's being provided, and I understand GLISA is associated with a NOAA grant, I think.
Yep.
I was curious if you are connected with a Climate Explorer website with the projections around the U.S., which is also funded by NOAA. And last but last, I had a question about the historic information. I know at ASHRAE we are providing some ranges of historic data and the changes over time, but one concern that we have is incorporating urban heat impact, as and associating that as climate change when we present data over time. So sometimes those climate recorders are in urban areas, and as the cities have grown, there's been a temperature increase, but it's not necessarily climate driven, but more urban infrastructure. So I was just curious if that's been broached.
So for your first question about you said the Climate Explorer, is that what you were asking? I forgot the name of it.
Yeah, it's Climate Explorer.
Yeah, so we're not officially, we're not a partner on that. I mean, we might use it, but I'm not too familiar with it, just because a lot of those types of, I'm trying to remember. I know GLISA provided input to one of those types of products, some Great Lakes language, but I don't remember if it was this tool or if it was another one. A lot of times if you're using kind of like a publicly available repository of climate data, they're not typically including data that we would recommend for the region, and that's kind of why I am not too familiar with it. I'm just looking on their website real quick. I can't really speak to that. We're not, I don't think we're contributing to anything on here right now. This would be an area where I think some of these, like Climate Wizard, Climate Explorer, Climate, trying to think of the other one that I believe we contributed to. There are lots of opportunities, I think, for our Ensemble project to inform some of these public-facing websites and bring some of our regional data to those interfaces. But most of them, I think right now, are just relying on CMIP data.
I think that that's mostly right. I think Explorer has been working to create also kind of bringing historic data to where the CMIP data begins in a visual that's very similar to what GLISA divisional data does. And I think that the two products at some point almost started being developed in parallel to one another. But they work at, I believe Explorer tries to be optimized at a county scale versus a division or a local climatologies like the GLISA products.
And then your second, question, would you mind repeating that one more time? I'm sorry.
That's okay. The second comment, and I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but maybe a recommendation, that if you are providing historic data,
oh yeah,
the
heat island. So
heat island impact. Yeah.
I will have to check with the person on our team who does the quality control checks on our station data, because I do see where that could become a problem, you know, if that signal is not somehow identified within the record, to know that it's not climate change, it's actually just urbanization. But I will have to ask how that's handled specifically. Beth, will there be like an email group or an email list for this group or something, so that I can kind of follow up that way, or how should I?
Yeah, and we might want to just start a something like an FAQ or like a question and answer document within the Google Drive for this group, that we could kind of track questions like these and then post responses and make sure people are getting connected to them.
Okay.
Other questions? I know that we're a little over time, but I think that I'm really grateful for the description that Laura provided of these different products. And if folks have things that are top of mind right now, we could probably do one more question before we move on. All right. Then I am going to go back to sharing my screen, and you should see a screen that now where it just repeats our project goals of kind of what it is we're coming together for. Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate that, and I always enjoy getting to hear where things are with the progress on the ensemble, because I just think it's an awesome project. So,
Thank you so much.
So, and I guess, you know, as we go through this and speaking to these project goals as you see them up on the screen now, one of the important purpose of this is to introduce users to GLISA's Ensemble and other and the regional climate model menus, and to really understand how are these products going to be useful and usable, and what is the role of the products, the menu, you know, the menu, the data then being made available, the support which GLISA offers. And this effort is to understand how ASAP, but also GLISA, can serve the private sector, as the private sector service providers are just doing much more of this work, and we see the growth of the adaptation and resilience marketplace here in the Great Lakes region and beyond. And so, you know, that's really at the core of the goals of this project. And as we think about providing these kind of data resources, we also want to ensure that this project is a vehicle that we bring forward the values of the principles and values that ASAP upholds in practicing adaptation. And so we see the work being inclusive of high quality data, trying to standardize data, and trying to ensure that as more people are entering the field and entering the marketplace, the values in the ASAP principles of practice and the knowledge and competencies which we have provided are being incorporated for everybody who's active in the work. The project goals that are going to come out of this, or the project outputs for this work, really speak to the breakout groups and the role of the advisory group, as we're going to be dividing up tasks and projects here in a minute. We have an ongoing responsibility to be developing a contact list of climate adaptation service providers in the Great Lakes region. You all should have a link to the current list of service providers. And we're seeking your input and refinement of that list. We hope to be documenting best practices and needs, so there'll be the group kind of jumping into that work today with the needs assessment survey. Working on in-person workshops to connect data providers with service providers, and then we'll be reporting all of this and thinking about replication. I know a lot of people are excited about the replication component for how we see this kind of effort expand into other regions. That's not on the table for breakouts today, but I would be surprised if it doesn't creep into conversations, because I think that this project is one that we think has a lot of value, not just in the Great Lakes region, but around the country. So as we look at where we are in our project timeline, we see that we're kind of moving from a phase 1 into phase 2. We do have this pretty solid foundation for the service provider list for the region. We have our advisory group committed. We have our core project team convened and working away. And so we're now going to be starting to get into the production of more of the deliverables that really begin to build on one another. So first, the service provider list, then the survey assessment, and then the workshop. And while the workshop is intended to be a product which will be informed by the needs assessment survey, we do think that there's work that we can be doing early on just to get a sense of what this workshop can look like and how we want to be preparing for it as the survey is also taking place. So again, we are at the, from our project commitments that folks made, you should have reviewed the project scope of work. We can resend it, or you can find this in the shared Google documents. Everybody should be reviewing or have reviewed the service provider list. And now we'll be moving into advise on specific project components. I'm just going to pause here before we dive into the next slide, because it's going to be pointing you to the information sheet on project components and then into breakout. So any questions on the information I just covered, really kind of project background and where we are right now? Great, and I said via chat, go ahead, and I think that we have most people, we know where you want to go in the breakouts, but do just drop into the chat your preferred breakout session, either breakout 1 for survey needs assessment, breakout 2 for workshop, so that we can be setting that up on the back end. It's going to be super fun. It's like you get into like a virtual room space portal and fly to another place, and then you get there and there's a whole other group of people. It's really cool.
Beth, while people are doing that, on the timeline and the phases for the people who are new to the project, could you just like ground that in actual like months? Like when are we aiming to have the workshop happen, just so everyone's on the same page there?
Absolutely. So phase 3 in the workshop is aimed to happen in late July. So this project has one workshop which is scoped in its project description that we have put to GLISA to begin the work. We see the potential for multiple workshops that could happen in the Great Lakes region, and that's something I think we'll talk about in the workshop group today. Is the centerpiece workshop, which is scoped for late July, and then the potential for additional workshops if we felt like it was possible to add them in. So this project is a year long. It began in November. It runs year 1 into October. And so with phase 2 taking place as we are going into March, April, May, the survey team will have a more in-depth timeline provided to them for the needs assessment survey component. But we hope to have that survey completed and the data starting to be reviewed by early May so that we can review it and understand what's there, develop a report, and have all of that to bring to a workshop in July. And then from July, be able to see what we've learned, probably put together the information from the survey, from the workshop, and then start that scoping of what does replicability look like in and beyond the Great Lakes region. So phase 4. Is that helpful? I'm going to believe that it is. Okay. All right, on this slide, the member engagement opportunities, I'm not going to talk through these, but if you're in the slide deck that was shared, you can select the description of project components and it will bring you to a Google document which provides a more in-depth review of what each of these project components look like. So this will be important in guiding conversations that will happen next as we go into our breakouts. So I encourage you to jump into that document. It was shared in the email that went out with meeting resources a couple of days ago. It's in the slides. And I will put the chat, I'll actually just drop this right into the chat for people as well. So with that,
So yeah, I'm going to jump in with a couple of breakout technical questions for folks. I would like to assign someone with a 360 number to the correct breakout. Who are you? 630.
You mean six? That's Laura Briley.
And which breakout would you like to join, Laura?
Beth, did you have an opinion or suggestion there?
I think that, no, I don't. I think that maybe to the survey, I see that we have a pretty, a heavy group of other kind of project core partners in the workshop group. So maybe the survey would be a helpful place at this point, Laura.
Okay. I would love to have you in the survey breakout, Laura. And then we've got 773 number.
Yes, Ann Ellingson. I'd like to be part of the workshop section.
All right, there you go. And then Tomlinson. Something tells me that's maybe 2 names or someone's name who's not really on the call.
So this is Beth Tomlinson, and group 1 is fine.
Thank you. Okay, so Beth, you're gonna join the survey breakout. That sounds great. And then finally, Brian and Amanda, are you still with us?
I'm here, yep.
Hi, Amanda. Okay.
Amanda.
Are you by chance joining us via the web browser?
The browser, yes, but I've called in separately.
You did call in separately, okay.
Although I am using Google Voice for that, so possibly that's making something weird.
I think that's the problem. If you're able, are you able to call back in using your cell phone?
Yeah, I can call using my cell.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and do that, and I will assign you to the correct breakout. And then Brian, are you with us? I think maybe Brian dropped off. Okay.
I'll keep an eye out for him and let you know if he returns. And I think he wanted to be in
the workshop.
Actually, he wanted to be in the workshop. So if he comes back, we'll probably keep the workshop in the main room. So he'll just.
Okay. Okay, we can do that. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So is now a good time to open the breakouts, Beth?
Does anybody have any questions before you go to your breakouts? All right. I think now is a good time.
Okay. We will see you all over there. And Amanda, are you on 518
Amanda,
now?
yeah, she's the 518
Okay,
number.
great, perfect.
Yep.
So, hi everyone. Can you all hear me?
Hello.
Okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we have Beth, Amanda, Glenn, and Laura. Is that correct?
Sounds good.
Yeah, anyone else who I didn't call? All right, great. Thanks for joining. Again, I'm Rachel Jacobson. I'm the Senior Program Manager at ASAP, and I'm joined by my colleague Kyle Sullivan, who is our Program Assistant. And I believe you all have probably been hearing a bit from Kyle with some email updates on this project. Does that sound right? If you haven't yet, then you will be soon. All right, so to help guide our breakout, I am going to share a Google Doc in the chat here, and I'm also going to share my screen so you all can see this Google Doc in case you are not able to access it. Just give me 1 second while I set that up. And before we jump in, do folks feel like they gained what they were hoping to from the introductions that we did in the main group? Or does anyone feel compelled to maybe say, actually, let's do that. Let's say, you know, what brought you here to our assessment breakout group, and say your name one more time so people can learn to associate voices with names. Glenn, I see you at the top of my list. Would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me all right? It actually bumped me off the audio when I went to breakout group.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Glenn Milner. I'm based out of Toronto, Ontario, and I think what brought me to this breakout group was really just I've seen a lot of stuff kind of in the Ontario landscape in the past 7 to 10 years on adaptation. So I'd be really kind of interested in kind of bringing that kind of understanding and lay of the land to this process and kind of linking that with the estate side. Prior to this, I'm in a firm now, but prior to that, I was at a nonprofit working on kind of as a boundary organization across Ontario. So just kind of assessing the needs of across the entire Great Lakes to be my area.
Got it. Erica, I'm sorry to call you out, but I think there might be some background noise on your line. Would you mind going on mute?
No, I don't mind, but also I was just gonna
introduce.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I can see myself now. I've got dog ears from my headphones. Anyway, I'm Erica Heller. I'm with Brendel Group. And one thing I didn't say in my introduction is that we are actually based in Colorado. So one of my interests is sort of learning about other practitioners in the Great Lakes region. We do work nationally, and we're always looking to have local partners and work with other practitioners and advance our practice that way. So just thought that this would be a great place for me to be engaged in terms of connecting, figuring out how to connect with other practitioners and what the needs are and capabilities are. So that's why I chose this one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica. All right, next I have Beth Tomlinson.
Hey everyone, this is Beth. Again, I'm with TKDA in Minnesota, active with ASHRAE, and I should also note the Minnesota Resilience Collaborative. So we have in our state a group of private and public entities working and together to find ways to develop projected climatic information for use within all of our industry. One thing that I specifically have struggled with is that projected climatic information is not necessarily in a format that's required by mechanical engineers to assess building design. or retro commissioning, which is an hourly data set. So I've been working with different climatologists on trying to find that type of information for public use, and it's not readily available. I've also been working with a lot of the ASHRAE development and legal concerns about using projected climatic information, and that it's not data and it's not what they say is defensible in court. So there's some legal liability in terms of using projected climatic information that I'd be interested in helping develop in the tools that are promoted for the Midwest region.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. Those are some really interesting considerations. So glad to have you in this group to represent them. All right, next I have Amanda Stevens.
Hi, yeah. So I work at NYSERDA and project manager here in our environmental research program. And we're about to, or actually are now kicking off our next version of our statewide climate impacts and adaptation assessment. And as part of that, we're actually doing a needs assessment as well. So I'm interested in kind of the overlap between the two and how one can maybe inform the other.
Excellent. Kyle, you're next on my list.
So I'm Kyle Sullivan, use they them pronouns. I'm an ASAP program assistant. And I'm excited for this particular portion, just trying to, similar to a lot of you, just trying to get a better, more detailed snapshot of what's happening in the Great Lakes region. I'm excited to kind of pick your brains today and put this together and hopefully make the outputs as useful to our collective interests as much as possible.
Great. And Laura, I feel like we got a pretty detailed introduction from you, but if there's anything you would add specifically on this survey and assessment piece, please feel free.
So again, Laura Briley with GLISA. This area is really new to me, so I'm kind of just listening, and maybe we'll be able to determine where I might be able to help out once we get a little farther along. We've done some needs assessment from the perspective of trying to determine like what decision makers need in terms of climate information and what types of information they're comfortable working with, but I'm not sure how much overlap there will be there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laura. Hopefully this will be really useful for you and your team. Did I miss anyone in that round of introductions? All right, well, welcome again to everyone. I'm excited because I just love assessments of all kinds. So I look forward to helping to lead this portion of the work. All right, so hopefully you can all see my screen, or you were able to pull up the document yourself so you can follow along as we, just give a little bit of background into what this practice and needs assessment is intended to be. So, we want to really understand where climate service providers are right now in terms of how they obtain, manipulate, and apply climate data information, also how they assess vulnerability, as well as how they engage stakeholders. And of course, the focus of this project, there's a big focus on, using those specific GLISA products that Laura gives that incredibly helpful overview to, in addition to products that are developed by the public and social profit sectors more generally, with the idea of, really creating that bridge, as Beth described, between what's happening in private sector and for-profit companies and what's happening in the public and social profit sectors. And so we're going to be doing two types of assessment. We're going to be doing a survey, an online survey, and we're going to be doing a fairly limited series of interviews. And the output of that will, of course, be a combined data analysis, which then will feed into a report. And the report will be able to be used, I would say, well, first and foremost, at least temporally, to inform the way that the workshops are designed, the workshop is designed. And then, of course, will also be used in any kind of follow-on efforts to transfer this work to other regions. So folks would be able to replicate the methodology that we used for the assessment, of course, look at the results and think about how they might be applicable or different in their region, etc. So we have the following timeline for this work. So by the end of this month, we are going to be finalizing the assessment instruments. So that will include an online survey instrument as well as a qualitative interview protocol. During the month of March, we'll gather the data, including having this online survey be open during the month of March and be conducting interviews throughout that month. We're looking to conduct, I would say, conservatively, 3 to 5 interviews, depending on how some other elements of the project shake out and what our capacity is. We might do additional interviews, but definitely looking to do at least 3 to 5. And then we'll take the month of April to analyze the data, and then take the month of May to really be interpreting that data and writing a report that can, again, guide those pieces that we talked about, the workshop and the transfer. So right now, today, of course, we want to gather your insight on the assessment instruments. And we're going to do that by reviewing together a series of guiding questions and potential assessment areas. But before we do that, I do want to pause and, I would say in terms of where advice from this group would be needed and or appreciated, I would say that there are additional opportunities. I would say, we're gonna do a data analysis plan where we would absolutely invite folks from this subgroup to attend and provide insight on how that analysis should be conducted and really what critical questions we should be looking at. And then, of course, and we'll also do a meeting to kick off the report writing. And so would definitely appreciate folks' input on, what should really be contained in that report and maybe what the tone and the approach should be. But Kyle and I can absolutely create opportunities for engagement at other points as well. So I want to pause and ask, what sounds most interesting or valuable for you in terms of points to engage along this timeline? And it's been requested that I post a link to this document. So let me do that one more time. And now it's sent through again for folks who want to pull it up. All right, so any thoughts? And let's just, if it's helpful, I can kind of illuminate where I think some other points of engagement could be. I would say we'll send around the sort of semi-final assessment instruments, and very happy for folks to engage in a document review. Is that something that would be of interest, being able to look at the assessment instruments before they are finalized? Okay.
Yes, Rachel, I'm trying to think of a response because I feel like there's probably a lot of things here. This is Laura. There's probably a lot of things here that GLISA can benefit from. And I know that you had asked the other day about, how much we wanted to be involved with some of this and having students help us out. I'm still waiting to hear from Maria on what our capacity is to take on more work. But ultimately, and I haven't looked at any of the questions, the survey questions or anything yet, but seems like we just want to make sure the survey questions are going to speak to some of the themes that we've experienced in terms of what, well, I think it's just a good idea to, for at least maybe somebody from GLISA to be able to review some of the survey questions to make sure the responses might speak to some of the things that we would be interested in knowing about, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll have the opportunity to brainstorm some of those questions today. And then, like I said, we will definitely be sending around those instruments before they're finalized. And so just kind of wanted to get a general sense today from folks about whether that's something they really do want to review. And it sounds like there's at least one person who's joined this subgroup who would like to review them, and that's great. We'll be sure that you have the opportunity.
Hi, Rachel. This is Glenn.
Yeah. Hi, Glenn.
I would also be interested in reviewing kind of the mechanisms and kind of how it goes out and how it's framed. I've actually done a couple of surveys across Ontario communities that we could potentially leverage from or consider how successful they were and how they were framed and what mechanisms were used. So yeah, would be very interested in reviewing that as well.
Great, and thank you for mentioning, Glenn, the previous surveys. So we'll be sure to include in the follow-up items from this meeting for you and anyone else who has other survey instruments that they've used either to good or not so good effect in the past. If you feel comfortable sharing those, we would really love to see them.
Absolutely, sounds good.
Thank you. All right, in terms of data gathering, I would say one thing that, one potential engagement opportunity would be for these interviews to be conducted for any subgroup member who is interested in conducting one or more of the qualitative interviews. That's certainly something that we could arrange. Obviously that's a little bit of a bigger lift, and so it's certainly not an expectation. But is there anyone on the line who feels particularly compelled to be involved in the qualitative interview portion?
This is Laura. Like I said before, I think let me get a response from Maria, and then I can kind of let you know what we think we might be able to help you with. We might need a few more questions answered. I'm not sure what all we would need to know in terms of like what kind of commitment level is required.
Sure. Okay, no problem. That sounds good. So moving on to data analysis, we certainly do not expect anyone in this group to take on the burden of data analysis, but we will, as I mentioned, absolutely be inviting folks to a meeting to plan for that data analysis, so we hope you will engage there. Anyone who does feel strongly that they'd like to be involved in data analysis in some other way, and Laura putting aside the question from my email, which I'm sure you'll get back on whenever you have a chance. Okay, yes, if someone asked me this question, I would say decidedly no. So not surprised that we're hearing crickets here. And then finally, for kind of same question for report writing, we plan to do that report writing in-house, but to include an initial kickoff meeting where folks will have the opportunity to share their insight, as well as send around a draft report for your review. Is there any other way that you'd like to be engaged in report writing? Okay, well now we get to move on to the fun part, which is a discussion about, it's a survey development discussion. I think that this discussion will inform the way we develop both the survey instrument as well as the qualitative interview protocol. So we can be thinking about both of those things together. And so for those who are following along on their own version of the Google Doc, where we just turned over to page 2, And you'll see a table with guiding questions and associated assessment areas. You know, to kick us off, let's look at the guiding questions. This is, these are 3 questions that we anticipate we will be able to answer through the survey and the qualitative interviews, 3 kind of big picture questions. How competent are providers in using climate products produced by the public and social profit sector, of course with a focus on those GLISA products? What are providers' opinions of these products? And what would it take for providers to start using these products, or perhaps, you know, use them to greater effect? Just want to open up the floor now to ask what you might add or change about these guiding questions, and feel free to read them again to yourself if that's helpful.
I think it would be helpful to just have it recorded what products people are already using. I don't want to push them. I mean, I'm assuming most people are not using GLISA products right now that you're going to be reaching out to, because they probably don't even know who we are. So I think it'd be helpful to know what they are using, so that then we could have a sense of whether or not that's even appropriate data to be using in our region, and then have the opportunity to bring them our knowledge of regional data, particularly for projections, but also for observations.
Yeah, absolutely. So that makes perfect sense. So it's like if what I just said was questions 1, 2, and 3, there's like a question 0, which is, what are you currently using?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Laura. This is Glenn. I think that, yeah, I'm still kind of getting into the foray of the private world as well, in terms of what products are being used and what are people kind of accessing as their go-to sources of projections, for instance. And it certainly seems to be quite different than in the kind of nonprofit sector where I was previously, where it was kind of people were waiting for endorsement or kind of rationale provided by government agencies, or kind of a very clear, robust data set from, let's say, GLISA. So yeah, I think that's a really good question. Kind of what are you currently using? And then, yeah, so that we can see, you know, is this robust for the Great Lakes Basin?
Great.
Hey, this is Beth. I have one thing that I'd recommend, at least for me. I prefer to call climate data when it's historic data collection, and when it's projections, we call it information. That's just a clarification for liability issues. But then also I was curious if you are tracking the recent Congress national budget and their expectations for federal entities or DoD to provide recommendations or guidance or expectations for any design and the use of risk assessments and potentially projected climatic information. So that's on the horizon, I think, this year, or their deadline is October. If you're looking for information in terms of what providers are using for projected climatic information, there may be some guidance coming in this coming year. I think there are some studies that have already been completed by at least a local entity called HGA, and they've done a national assessment of what type of projected climatic information is used by either state, counties, private entities. So you may want to reach out to them to see if you can kind of move forward from where they've already been.
Do you know what that acronym is, HGA?
It's an acronym for, well, it's a private company. It's an architectural engineering firm.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that, Beth. And I heard you say guidance, and I think it sounded like guidance that's coming through the budgeting process for federal agencies. Do I have that right? Yeah,
they are expected in order to, their budgets are appropriated, but they're not allowed to use more than 25% of their budget until they have expectations in their design manuals for, I suppose, climatic risks, in which case they'd have to provide some kind of guidance or expectations of how private companies use projected climatic information. So I'm just trying to think of ways to help you guys out.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I think that you, I heard you say specifically DoD. Is that, are you talking specifically about DoD, or are there other federal agencies that are being, that are under this provision?
No, I think it's all federal entities like the GSA.
Okay, okay, so it's all, okay, got it.
Yeah.
This is Erica. This is a little bit different topic, but practitioners trying to assess awareness of products from folks that where they do have gaps in their knowledge. So the way that some of these questions are structured, so what products have they used, or what problem space have they applied products, I think might leave out some information that we could gather by asking people, basically figuring out where they're just not aware of things that do exist. So asking people, what kinds of problem spaces do you not have the data resources you need? We might find out that that may be the way that we find out what they are not aware of, even if it does exist.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's almost like, yeah, I feel like that's back in question 0 as well. It's like, what are you currently using? What do you need that you think you don't have? You know, just starting from the level of asking them about their current practice more so than guiding them towards specific resources.
Yeah, the idea they don't know what they don't know.
This is Beth again. I'd really be curious if other firms find that owners or requests for proposals are asking for the use of this type of information. What kind of carrots are out there to encourage design firms or entities to use projected information?
Yeah, so when we're talking about
Fix, you know, even like requirements and codes or any, like what's moving them towards this legal liability or expectations from design contracts.
I just realized I put that in the barriers column, but it seems like what you're suggesting is, you know, kind of a refinement or an addition to this opportunities column. You know, what incentives currently exist that we should be capitalizing on. Does that seem like the right characterization?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, so I want to leave at least a couple minutes to talk about this final set of questions. I think what we'll do is we'll send around this document again in our follow-up and invite you all to provide any additional insight in writing that you weren't able to share in real time today. And yeah, we'll leave the last couple minutes we have here to talk about this final set, which is about special considerations for serving private organizations. So, you know, ASAP has worked on a couple of projects in the past, working specifically with for-profit companies, and our experience has taught us that, and of course, it's intuitive to think that, for for-profit companies, a lot of what's happening is proprietary or sensitive, and we know that, every company and every organization really has their kind of special sauce that they may or may not want to share with others, especially competitors. And so we want to make sure that we design these assessments in a way that encourages folks to really give honest responses, while of course recognizing this fact. So just wanted to get your thoughts and insight about how we might be able to design questions that enable us to be sensitive to this consideration.
Yeah, okay. This is Erica. I think it may depend a lot on who their client base is. So a lot of our clients are public sector, and so there's a lot of openness there already. So for some practitioners who serve a different client base, also a private sector client base, they may be more sensitive, and I wouldn't probably be able to speak to that as well. I think the other thing that the practitioners may be doing is, and it reminds me a little bit of the GLISA presentation about sort of using and adapting different tools and figuring out where to apply them. I think sometimes consultants are drawing on multiple sources and combining them in unique ways that sort of add up to a special sauce. I mean, Burger King special sauce is really basically mayo, ketchup, and relish. It's not things that you can't get off the shelf. It's just the proportion of the way they mix them. So asking exactly how they're mixing them would be a problem, but asking them what their inputs are is not necessarily a problem. Beyond that, I mean, we're not asking anything about revenues or costs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you. And I think we can absolutely design questions with that in mind, that we're trying to understand the components, and it's less important to us. We want to understand a little bit about how they're being applied, but we don't need to understand, exactly how they're mixed together to get, that special color in the sauce. Yeah, any other ideas? And then I think I'll merge us back with a larger group so we can say goodbye to everyone.
I have a question. This is Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Are you proactively selecting firms in the list that do use projected climatic information or assess in some manner changes to the environment? Or are you just asking all architectural engineering firms or private sector? My only reason for asking that is, as I've done a lot of outreach to engineering societies, at least in the state of Minnesota, and actually nationally with ASHRAE, I'm really surprised by the lack of knowledge of how climatic information that's used impacts their designs. They just are unaware of the situation. Not that they're unconcerned once they hear about it, but they just aren't aware that the data they use and assume is, not changing, that it is, and it impacts the way that they present information to their clients. So if you are just selecting any firm, you may want to broach the topic a little lightly, I guess, in terms of introducing the concept that they may have risk in what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really great question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that this project is designed to capture primarily what we explicitly label climate service providers.
Okay.
And of course, that label and that definition gets really fuzzy when you're talking about, let's say, a design and engineering firm, right? Because they may have some folks who provide in-house expertise related to how climate information is, accessed and applied. But it may not be really fully integrated into their business model, right? But we may still call those people climate service providers, or firms rather, climate service providers. So I really appreciate raising that question. And I think we think about it a little bit as a spectrum, and it'll be, I would encourage you to check out the service provider list, and maybe share with us whether you think the folks who are going to be asked to respond to these assessments skew more towards one end of the spectrum or another. And that might help us really target the questions well. Did I do a good job of turning your question into a request?
Yeah, I did look. I looked at the list. I wasn't sure how people were identifying the firms that were listed. So I wanted to make sure that if they just happen to be firms within the Midwest area, that as we contact them or reach out, that it's thoughtful on how we present the topic of risk.
Yeah, yeah. No, I really appreciate you raising that. And we will definitely make sure that if we really do have those constituents on the list, that we will make sure the questions are targeted in that way. All right, I know I see that some folks have already dropped off because we are at time. I'm gonna merge everyone back into the main session. So if you have just one more minute to wrap things up with us, that will be wonderful. And if not, thank you so much for joining. And you can look for some next steps from us coming very shortly. Breakout rooms, close all rooms, here we go.
Mute, Jeff.
Sorry. Not sure what happened there. Or they could be asking it in a different way, which is just kind of a checkbox. Do you guys, what kind of climate data are you using? And 9 times out of 10, it just says what the consultants provide. And that's not necessarily going to be useful to us. So it's worth asking them.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. We're back. This is the assessment group. We missed you all so much.
We're so glad that you came back. We were just covering some of our next steps, which were to put together our notes and to get them into a shared document to you in the assessment group. We have some ideas of questions that might be helpful to include in the needs wants assessment, so that we're building a workshop that is the right kind of length and style and information that's going to be really meaningful. So we're excited to share that with you guys. Did everybody else go home from there? Did they, it was like recess, so they just left? After?
Yeah, some people left. I mean, I don't know. They can't smell us. It's a video call. Seems a mystery why they left.
Maybe it's because it's 2 minutes over time.
Could be that one.
So, for those of you who are still here, who stayed and who left and came back from the breakout, thanks for doing that. We'll have notes from this meeting and we'll plan to meet again. I didn't say this earlier. We did find a great standing meeting time that worked for almost everyone, like everyone except, I don't know, it was like me maybe or something. It's a great meeting time. And so we're going to be meeting going forward on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time, I think is going to be the standing meeting. And I'm excited for that. And we'll send out meeting invitations along with notes and assignments for next steps to everyone. So thanks to all who are here and to everybody who was here and who left. They can hear the thanks in the recording when they listen to the end.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.